of this age is concerned, it was religious in nature. Okay, it was the age is also called as the age of Puritans. You know, it stands for, it talks about Puritanism. It talks about religiosity. So we can find religiosity, morality in this kind of literature. For example, take the case of Paradise Lost, John Milton's Paradise Lost, which is one of the textbooks prescribed in your syllabus. Okay. The other is which was written in blank verse, and the other John Milton wrote a sequel to it called Paradise Regained. But then comes John Donne into scene. You know, all there was this group of poets called metaphysical poets. Okay, we can find wit in their poetry. They wrote about all these things, called metaphysics. You know, this was a group of poets called, like, we had poets like John Herbert. They relied wit as a main instrument of poetry. So there was a school of poetry called the metaphysical school, which was headed by John Donne. John Donne, you might have come across his poem called "Death Be Known Proud," where he kind of addresses to death, where he talks about the death, death being a pride being. Okay, and he kind of addresses to the death how death is. Why do you feel proud of yourself? You think you are powerful, but death, you say that death shall die, death shall be no more. So one day, eventually, death has to perish also. And he talks about the agencies, the sources of death. He says that people die by accidents, people die by because of disease, and people die because they have other issues, other problems, other ailments, for example. So there are different sources to death. So that is one of the poems by John Donne. And there were other people also who wrote a good amount of poetry. They produced a good amount of literature in the form of poems like John Herbert. But the main instrument of their poetry was wit. And at the same time, we talk about Cavalier poets also. They were also very good. John Milton or John Donne, and Cavalier poets like Robert Herrick. Robert Herrick was the most important of them all. So all in all, when we talk about all these people, all these poets, the nature, so for the nature of the poetry, nature of the writing was concerned, that was religious in nature. They were very conservative in their approach, we can say. They were politically conservative, and they were religiously conservative. So that is why this age is also called as the age of Puritans or the age of Puritanism. And second, most important thing which happened in this period of literature, in this period of English literature or British literature, poets, the people or the writers, it is known as, it is known for satires. So, for example, you have an important satire prescribed in your syllabus, that is Absalom Achitophel. Now, what is satire? Satire we have already defined as something, a writing when we want to say, when we want to, yeah, please mute yourself. When we want to say, when you want to say one thing but you mean another thing. So that is what is satire all about. When you want to say something but you mean other thing. So this, this period of literature, this age of literature is known for writing for satires, and it was known for satires where they were satirical, wit. The age of the reliance over the dependence of is concerned, it relied upon satirical wit. Okay, so it is actually wit which operates in satires. So all the other concepts related to this age, we said that it was materialistic, the outlook of the writers. Okay, it somebody is asking. We are talking about 17th century literature, the background to it, and different writers of different genres. And now we are talking about different schools of schools of poetry. You had metaphysical school, you had the other group called Cavalier poets, you had all these people writing almost about the same thing. Their outlook was the same. We talked about materialism. Materialism in this particular age, in this age of literature, was a dominant. It was a dominant feature because of industrialization. Because industrialization had started, and commercialism also it was kind of accelerator for the materialistic look. Urbanization, for example, you can talk about urbanization at the same time. So when we talk about particularly in the context of in the age of Dryden, it stands for, we can say it produced satires. What did they do in satire? They actually talked about, they made fun of people. You know, they were very kind of, we can say, it was based on likes and dislikes. They talked about man and society, the relationship between man and society. It was about the shortcomings of man. It was about the limitations of man. Rather than the aspirations, the dreams, etc., which of course romantic literature is all about, and that dreams and aspirations. They were very kind of, we can say, they were not objective. They focused on likes and dislikes of other people. You know, when we talk about all these satire. So this basically the age of Dryden, majorly, especially it focused on the faults of man, the faults of man or man, the limitations. Another important figure which comes into scene is Alexander Pope, who was is regarded as one of the great poets of English literature. And Alexander Pope is not, maybe not in your syllabus. Mm, yeah, it's not, he's not there. But he was both a poet and literary theorist or literary critic. He came up with his essay called Essay on Man, where he talked about man and the relationship between man and society. And he also came up with an essay called Essay on Poetry, where he talked about literature, where he talked about this. And these essays were written. These essays were written in poetry. They were written in verse form. So for the Dryden is concerned, Dryden was the fountainhead, and flowering, we can say, was done by Pope. So all these first, Dryden comes, then comes Pope comes, and Johnson comes. Johnson comes later on in this particular age. The whole age is called as, it is called as neoclassical period. Okay, so Dryden was both a poet and a dramatist, and he was a theorist also, literary theorist. Then comes Ben Jonson is regarded as the father of neoclassical poetry, as I already told you, because why neoclassicals? Why they were called as neoclassicals? Because they imitated Greeks and Romans. They were the imitators of classics. That is why imitator, for example. Okay, they imitated those long epics like Homer, Virgil, etc., which are known as long epics. But at the same time, they wrote short fiction, short epics also, satirical epics, heroic in nature. So you should remember this group like Ben Jonson, then comes Pope, later on comes Dr. Samuel Johnson. They were all neoclassical poets. Okay, so for his dramatic poesy, it is one of the Dryden. I told you he was a dramatist, he was a poet, and he was a literary theorist also. He was a multi-dimensional personality, and he is known for his essay called an essay for dramatic poesy, which was published in 1668. He wrote critical essays. Uh, Okay. And all these poets, actually, all these people, all these writers, they imitated Greek and Roman, the classicals. They actually wanted to bring literary stream to serious classical literature. That's why they are called as classicals. And talking about this age in general, there was, it was known for narrow range of themes. It was, because they had confined literature to man as a social being, and man versus society. They talked about man versus society. Man, they talked about the limitations of man, the faults of man. So it was, and so for the form, the style, and the content was concerned, and thematically also. So for the themes of the literature, this kind of the literature they produced was concerned. It was confined, we can say. It was confined. It basically talked about. It focused on the limitations of man. It was based on. Take the case of satire, for example. It was basically talking about likes and dislikes. It was not objective, it was subjective, because it was based on likes and dislikes of a writer. That's what they did in in their writings, rather, in poetry especially, and poetry in drama. Dryden is less known for his dramas. For example, he has to his credit a play called Troilus and Cressida. uh, Troilus and Cressida, and the other play he has written is Aurangzeb. We do not often talk about. Dryden is better known as a poet, as a literary theorist. So when we talk about his plays, why they were not famous, why we do not often talk about them, because they talk about elitist audience. They address elitist audience. Okay, that is what his plays were meant for, and the audience. So for the subject matter, the style, the diction, they did not speak in the language of common people. Everything was elitist in nature. So that is what the plays were all about. And he has, to his credit, some one of the famous poems by uh, John Dryden is MacFlecknoe. The other poem is Absalom and Achitophel, which is an which is a mock epic, where he kind of makes fun of somebody. That is what I was talking to you, that the literature they produced in this particular age was about mocking someone, making fun of somebody. It talked about the faults, the limitations of some. It was based on, we can say, on personal liking or disliking, kind of, it was based on prejudice. Okay. So what these all these writers were doing in this particular age, or what they are doing in this particular age, they are trying to repeat history, because neoclassicals, they are trying trying to bring back the classicals or classical writers, and they try to talk about the same thing, which in a way is wrong, we can say, because you cannot repeat history. And Karl Marx, I told you, in this context, says that history cannot be repeated. If it does, it becomes a farce. Okay, so therefore, Dryden, so for the age of Dryden is concerned, Dryden, we can say in conclusion that he was a great poet. Since he was a great poet, he had no difficulty in imitating classicals or classical writers. And let me tell you, All for Love or Indian Poem, they were also some of the plays written by John Dryden, but then they are not remembered much. They are not important. They are not considered as important plays, because their scope, they were very limited in when it comes to scope, when it comes to the diction, the content, the characterization, because it was severely damaged by being elitist, by both subject matter, style, and form. Okay, so that was in brief about the age of Dryden, who belongs to 17th century. Um, do you follow me? Am I audible to you all? Am I audible to you all?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Then comes Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope was, as a poet and a theorist, uh, he belongs to first part, half of the 18th century actually. So all these people actually they belong to neoclassical school, or neoclassical school of poetry, which ends with Dryden, which starts with Dryden and ends with Samuel Johnson, Dr. Samuel Johnson. So all these people, in fact, you had a poet, you had people like poets like John Milton, Johnson, then Cavalier poets. All these people, what was the common thing between them? They were in conservatism. The common thing between them was conservatism. Okay. Uh, and also, when we talk about Pope, he is known, normally he is known for his quotations, his proverbs. For example, he says he is known for his essay called, where he says that proper study of mankind is man. He normally talks about the man and society, the relationship between man and society, which we have been talking about. So all that we are looking for is individualism in this kind of literature. So history, social sciences came up in this particular age. So social scientists, they try to sum up the human soul. They try to sum up the human role in the society, the society and the relationship between humans and society. And their focus was on limitations. Their focus was not on explorations. Their focus was not on possibilities. It was the so all in all, overall, the mood of the age or the temper of the age was satirical in nature. Even their versification, even their poetry was satirical in nature, and that's why language and society became the focus of Pope and other fellow writers, other colleagues. Uh, so far the poetry of Pope is concerned, he has to his credit, Rape of the Lock. I think Rape of the Lock is maybe, it is not there in your syllabus, which is a, which is a kind of a long poem where cutting of the lock is considered as heroic, where it's a small thing, cutting of the lock, and it is because of that uh, uh, cutting of the log, it becomes heroic. It is considered as heroic. It is called as mock. These poems are called as mock heroic poems, where things are blown out of proportion, where things are exaggerated, where elevated language, exaggerated language is used. Like, for example, in the case of India, in the Indian context, you have texts like, you have writings like Ramayana, more heroic, these epics I'm talking about, Mahabharata. In the similar way, Rape of the Lock was one of the epics, we can say, but it was a mock epic. Because this age talked about satire, this age was known for satirical poetry, this age was known as mock epics also. So mock epics, what does a poet do? What does a poet do in this kind of poetry? He uses elevated language. He uses, exaggerated language. He uses inflating language. And when talking about Pope, Alexander Pope, he has to his credit another poem called the Dunciad. So Dunciad talks about, it is a set of portraits. So we can say that there is an inherent dichotomy between the subject and the style, where the subject is unheroic and style is heroic. The other point to his credit is making a mountain of molehill. That is another poem by Alexander Pope. Alexander Pope, on the other hand, has an essay on man, but this particular essay is written in poetry, in verse, but he calls it essay. He titles it essay, but it is written in verse form, in poetic form. The other writing to his critic is essay on poetry. So it actually kind of talks about, it tries to create a dichotomy between wish and the performance. The essay on man basically talks about the overall, we can say, it talks about the position of man in the society. It talks about the relationship between man and society. And essay on man, we can say it defines the overall mood of the age, overall temper of this age called neoclassical poetry. So essay on man, it basically talks about the nature of man, his position in the society, etc. So using the epic style for ridiculing the small limited nature, uh, that is what these poets, all these writers do. They try to ridicule somebody. In their writings, for example, take the case of John Dryden in Absolute Inevitable. What does he do? He makes fun of somebody, mock epics. So it was, as I already told you, that it was based on personal liking and disliking. It was very subjective in nature. The literature they wrote, the literature they produced, especially poetry. And talking about Alexander Pope, he has to his credit another piece called Essay on Criticism. Essay on Criticism is like a treatise, it's kind of thesis, we can say, which talks about the nature of art. Okay, and at the same time, when we talk about this age, other developments were happening. We had some social science side, so science books which were written by different people, by social scientists. We had history books written by people, by writers, for example. There's an important writing which happened in this particular age called The Rise and Fall of Roman Empire, which talks about the Roman Empire. The book is titled as The Rise and Fall of Roman Empire, and it was written by a historian. Okay. Then comes, for example, at the same time we talk about French Revolution, which happened in this particular century. French Revolution, it was by Voltaire and Rousseau, who were responsible for bringing the French Revolution. French Revolution talked about it gave three slogans like freedom, equality, and dignity of the individual man. Uh, the other important figure during this period was Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes was a philosopher who said that sense, which is being brought out into the center. He was one of the philosophers in this particular age. And later, this age, when we talk about this age of later comes at the end of this period, 17th century literature, the first half of 18th century, it was the age of reason, age of common sense. Johnson was the kind of, you can say, the representative figure of this age. And at the same time, John Locke comes into scene. John Locke was a Greek philosopher who came up with an essay called An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. So you can look at the titles. It is very obvious that they talked about humans, they talked about human society, they talked about human versus society in general, overall. And this essay was published in 1690. John Locke's An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. David Hume David Hume is the other philosopher who comes into scene, and he comes up with an essay called The Nature of Man. Once again, see the title. So, Nature of Man, where they talk about the nature, where they talk about the position of man in the society and nature of society also. Uh, so that is for half a century, theaters were closed. As I already told you that this age is known for Puritanism. These people were called as Puritans. Okay, so they were kind of moralists. And later on, the age is called where when these theaters were revived, the learning was revived. That's why that period is called as age of revival. It happened in 1660. So overall, in conclusion, we can say when we talk about this particular age, there was this kind of the narrow outlook in the poetry of this age, in the age of Dryden, in the age of Pope. Okay, so narrow outlook, there was this materialistic outlook, because urbanization, materialism was happening, and is contemporary. So there was this kind of artificial nature of comedy of manners. We talk about, we have, for example, when we talk about the dramas, you have a dramatist called William Congreve in the genre of dramas, in the genre of plays. We have an important dramatist who is known as William Congreve. His one of his plays is prescribed in US syllabus called The Way of the World. So William Congreve is one of the important dramatists who belong to this age. The other the other play to his credit is The Old Bachelor, which was published in 1693. So basically, when we talk about this drama called The Way of the World, which is prescribed in your syllabus, it basically talks about how the world goes on, the way of the world. Look at the title; it is obvious. You can guess the meaning from the title. It basically it focuses on the way of the world, how the world goes on. So that was the primary subject of the age, we can say. It was the focus was on social life, the focus was on material life. Okay, and other other important person who comes into scene is Jeremy Collier. He came up with his book called A Short View of Immortality and Performances of English Tales. Uh, it was, kind highly restrictive. So this comedy called William Conway's comedy is they are called, restoration comedies, restoration comedies or restoration drama. Okay, and at the same time we had another dramatist in this particular age in the genre of dramas called uh, Sheridan. Sheridan comes up with an important drama called School of Scandal. Uh, yeah, School of Scandal. So the other part of the age which belongs to Dr. Samuel Johnson. Now, Dr. Samuel Johnson was the last of neoclassical poets. Okay, one second, give me a minute. Do you follow me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sir.
Others, please respond. We are still talking about somebody is asking me, could you please share the screen to stay focused on this on our portal? I'm sorry I will do that next time. Now, actually, there is some disturbance in my room. I mean, I won't be able to do that. Next time, I will take care. I thought to, put off my camera because I thought sometimes it is disturbing. So I put off that. But from the next class onwards, I will do that. Sure. Do you follow me? Do you have any questions? Anything you want to ask me, or any doubts, any clarifications, or you want to make a comment or anything? You can add up to whatever I have said so far, out of your understanding, out of your knowledge. You can always do that in my class. Please let us make it interactive. You want to say something from your side? You want to add up? Please do that. I will be happy. I shall be happy. It shouldn't be as I have been telling you, as I have been instructing you that it shouldn't be one way flow of information. One way flow of information. That is how if it is one way flow of information, it becomes kind of monotonous. So I want you to interact. I want you to make it interactive. Please do that. If you have any questions, any queries, if you want to ask something, then later on, I mean, after that, we can move further. Do you follow me?
Sir, excuse me.
Yes.
What kind of questions will come from Dryden's poetry? It will be the same which is given in the textbook, like that Absalom and Achitophel, that lesson.
Sometimes the same question which is there in your question paper, simple question paper can be asked, but then sometimes they can frame it differently. The question can be the same, but sometimes they can frame it differently.
Okay.
You can be asking the same question, but the way they
but in a different way.
Yeah,
Okay.
in a different way. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I want you to talk about the content. The questions leave about it. We can discuss it later. I want you to talk about the content, how it is
Yes,
going on.
in the next class, if you please clarify the plot of that Dryden's poetry, then it will be easy for us, because that in textbook we have that one big poem in that, right? Absalom, that one. So if you just clarify that the plot, what is the plot actually in a brief, so that I'll get an idea.
Okay. Yeah, sure, I will do that. Don't worry about it.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Okay, so shall I continue? Shall I continue with the class? You're not speaking anything. You're not saying anything.
Yes, sir. Continue.
Okay, all right, fine. So the other literary figure, the other very important poet who belongs to the same age, the age is in fact this age is named after his name, as he was a representative poet of his period, of his time period, and he is Dr. Samuel Johnson. So we normally name this the about neoclassical poetry. When we talk about neoclassical poets, they are like a group. So 1 second. So when we talk about neoclassical group and neoclassical poets, first the founder and father, fountainhead of neoclassical poetry is Ben Jonson. Okay, then comes Alexander Pope, and then comes last but not least is Johnson. Dryden being one of Dryden, John Milton, and all the John Dryden, John Milton, John Donne, they belong to the 17th century. But this is the age of neoclassicism. All these they were. Ben Jonson was the founder, and Dr. Samuel Johnson was somebody who came at last, who belongs to the later part of neoclassical period, you can say. And he is known by the name called lawgiver, because he talked about he was not a major poet. Talking about Dr. Johnson, he was not a major poet. He was basically a literary, he was more of a literary critique, he was more of a literary theorist, and he was known for law giving. Law giving in the sense he was known for he was known for do this and do that. He always instructed the writers, we can say, and he was known for that. That is why lawgiving. He was known for lawgiving. So neoclassical age, I already told you, it started with Dryden, and it ends with Dr. Johnson, Dr. Samuel Johnson, which was the imitation of Greek and Roman literature, as we have already been talking about, especially Aristotle's Poetics and Horace. So the manner of poetry writing is, his manner of poetry writing is law giving. But then of course he is not a major poet. He is known for his essay called Lives of Great Poets. So we will talk about that. Okay, so he is known, but he has to his credit a poem called The Vanity of Human Wishes. Uh, Vanity of Human Wishes. In fact, Dr. Johnson is also not in your syllabus. He is, as a poet, we do not talk about him very much because he is not a major poet. But he has to his credit a very important poem called The Vanity of Human Wishes. In that particular poem, he says that wishes end in nothingness. He says that human wishes are unlimited. So they kind of, you think that man thinks that he's the ruler of the universe. He thinks that he is the ruler of the world. But when we talk about his wishes, his wishes are, they are he has unlimited wishes. So it is a futile exercise to run after those wishes. And this essay, this poem was published in the year 1749. So Johnson's talking about Johnson's age. Johnson's age was called the age of reason because rather than the writing down the imitation of classics, or rather than the pulling down of rivals, when we talk about other writers, for example, John Dryden and other writers, Alexander Pope, all these people, what did they do in their writings? What did they do in their poetry? They pulled the legs of others. Their writings was based on personal likes or dislikes. Their writings were based on personal prejudices. So that is, but when it comes to Johnson, when we talk about Johnson, Johnson's age was known as the age of sense and sensibility. Johnson's age was known as the age of reason. He preferred reason over personal likings and dislikings. Okay, so his belief was that he strongly believed that whatever stands to the reason should be accepted, and whatever stands does not stand out, whatever does not stand to reason should be disliked, it should be discarded, it should be despised, it should be condemned, it shouldn't be liked, it should be disliked. So basically, what Johnson is trying to say, what Johnson is trying to do, his over his writings or concerned his poetry or his essays, his approach to literature was that it shouldn't be based on uh, personal likings or personal prejudices. Rather, the literature, the writing should be based on reason. So that is why his age is known as, his time period is known as the age of sense or the age of reason. And his dates are, he was born in 1709 and he died in 1784. This particular poem was published in 1749, and Samuel Johnson, as I already told you, he was not a great poet, but he was a great thinker. Rather than his poems, it is his one of his essays. He is actually known for his essay called "Lives of Great Poets," which became very important. Which became he is known for that essay. He's famous for that essay where he talks about lives of essay. He talks about different poets of English, starting from Chaucer to Alexander Pope. So he talks about all these poets. He kind of gives biographical sketch. He talks about their personality. He talks about how they looked or how they behaved, and kind of it was like a biographical sketch, we can say. So lives of the poets is still in demand, and that is how that is why Dr. Johnson is famous. So to conclude, we can say that the end of the classical neoclassical poetry, it had its own virtues. Of course, it had its own faults, but it had its own virtues also. It has its own laurels also. That's why what we can say in conclusion. And talking about the age of Johnson, we have an important landmark happening in this particular age. Prose comes for the first time in English literature, in British literature. This essay writing comes into scene. So we had periodicals. We talk about periodicals in this particular age, in the age of Johnson. The subject of the poetry, it was the general critique of contemporary society. It was like morals. The 17th century poetry was concerned. It talked about morals and manners. It talked about man versus society. It talked about the limitations of man, the faults of man, and people thought that it is a kind of coding process. Now, and these people, now two people comes into scene. Like we had two important people, two important essays called who came up with periodicals. Two important people. That is, the first person is called as Thomas Edison. Thomas Joseph Edison and Richard Steele. And Thomas Edison was born in 1672 and he died in 1719. That are the dates of Thomas Edison. And the other important figure, his colleague, his friend, his dates are 1672 and he died in 1729. So they wrote together, they wrote in collaboration. So their names are taken together, Edison and Steele. So they were great minds. They had that flair of writing, which was full of humor, which was full of wit, the style, and the interest of their writing was quite interesting. So the first 30 years of 18th century, and they brought out weekly publications. Their essays were called as, it was periodicals in the sense regular publications. They got it published weekly, fortnightly, monthly, and they brought out these different publications and with different names. For example, they started with Spectator. Spectator was a kind of commentary, a general commentary on general life, the habits, etc. And Guardian, for example. Guardian was also one of the periodicals by these people who wrote in collaboration, called Edison and Steele. Old Vic is also one of the periodicals they came up with. The Freeholder is yet another periodical to their credit. So Edison and Steele were, we can say, the pioneers of periodicals. So the subject matter, the content was the same when we talk about all these periodicals. Okay, but they changed the names in order to give an impression to the people that it is something new. Otherwise, it was not. They talked about the same old thing. The subject matter was the same, but they came up with different names in order to kind of keep that suspense for the general people. Okay, so changing of names was essential so to sustain their continence. Spectator, when you talk about Spectator and Tatler, it kind of gave status and identity to these people called Edison and Steele. Okay, and later it was a period for some time periodicals became important because people had lost maybe interest in poetry. They were not reading it anymore. It was a kind of boring thing for them. But then a novel came up later in the later part of the century, and it was novel which sustained itself because novels you have a long chain of events, and you can once you start a novel, you can stop at one place, and then you can later you can resume the story. So in a way,
Yeah.
Stay safe.
One second.
मैं क्या करना?
Stay safe.
मैं क्या?
Yes. Okay, so novels you have, interesting tales. There is a sustained plot, a long plot. You can resume your story later. So there are the plot, the different chain of events are linked up in to one another in a novel. So novel, we can say novel was the baby of the 18th century, where, for example, a novel called pioneers of novel, the people who started novel are the first man who started the novel is called as Richardson was the first person who started writing novels. So he is known for his novel called Pamela. Moll Flanders is yet another novel to be studied. So pioneers, he was somebody who started writing novel. Richardson was a religious person. He was a spiritual writer, we can say. The other novelist is Henry Fielding. Now, Henry Fielding, he was a social critic. He was a novelist, and he came up with a novel called Tom Jones. Tom Jones is there. No, it is no. Henry Fielding. You have the Henry Fielding is there in your syllabus. Yes.
Yes,
So
sir.
yes, Henry Fielding. Henry Fielding was yet another the other novelist actually, and we have an important novel here which came up in this age in the first in the starting in the beginning of the age called Pilgrim's Progress. So when you talk about this Pamela, when you talk about Richardson, since he was a religious writer, a spiritual writer, they talked about all these religious things. They talked about the subject matter was religious. But when we talk about um, Henry Fielding, he kind of he in the response of Pamela, he wrote a novel called Shamila in order to make fun of the earlier novel called Pamela. So because he thought that, and Henry Fielding thought that Henry Fielding thought that when Richardson wrote that novel called Pamela, he wrote that since there is no we cannot there is no humor in when we talk about any religious writing. There is no place, there is no space for humor, etc. So that is why Richardson, who had written a maiden novel in English literature, he is not known as the father of English novel. It is actually Henry Fielding who is considered as the father and founder of novel writing or novelist. Okay, because in religious writings and religious novel, there is no scope of humor, there is no scope of wit, there is no scope of flippant stuff when we talk about a religious novel. That is why he is regarded as a father of English novel. Moll Flanders, Shamila, they were written by Pamela, sorry, by Richardson. Okay, so they have a similar form, and Picard's novel also came into scene where Picaro it comes. The derivative is Picaro. Picaro is a somebody who is a hero who is unheroic. Okay, the protagonist of the novel is unheroic. So he is a kind of antithesis of the heroic character. So we had Picard's novels which came into scene, which come into scene in this age of English literature. So it was like a comical counterpart of the hero when we talk about Picard's novels. Okay, so that is what so we have discussed different genres. So for 17th and 18th century, 18th century actually it was 18th century where essay writing, periodicals, essay came a bit later. I mean, when Francis Bacon started writing, but it was periodicals. Before that, it was poetry. People were interested in reading poetry, and it was then novel came up, a longer narrative, which came up in the 18th century. So we have discussed different genres. So, but 17th century and later, and the first part of 18th century is concerned. We have still 5 minutes. If any questions, anything, you can ask. Hello? Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir.
We have still 5 minutes. We can make use of those 5 minutes. If you want to ask a question, if you want to say something on your own, please feel free to talk. Please feel free to speak. Hello? Any questions, anything? Yes?
Sir, now unit 11 is completed, sir.
Unit? No,
Unit
we have
11.
no, not unit 11.
Of the
Not
novel
unit,
and the romantic poetry.
no, we are still talking about, yeah, we gave some introduction to the diagram of the rise of the novel, that is unit 11, you can say that. Yeah, I started talking about that. But I'm yet to start on, the 18th century literature. I talked about I talked about these people called Richardson and Henry Fielding, who were the first people who started writing novels. Richardson started writing with Pamela, and then Henry Fielding comes up with a novel called Shamila. Kind of, he made fun of that novel, and he is known for Henry Fielding is known for his novel called Tom Jones. Tom Jones is it is there in your syllabus, I think. Tom, yes, no, Joseph Andrews.
Jones handwritten. That is a 12th unit, sir.
Henry Fielding is the name of the novelist.
Yes.
Yeah. Joseph Andrews is a name of a novel. Any question, anything, or you want to pass on a comment, or you want to say something on your own, out of your understanding, out of your knowledge, based on your understanding, you can always do that. Please say something. Sharma? M. Sharma, are you there? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Oh God, there's a lot of noise coming from somewhere. I think you guys are you sleeping or are you attending the classes? It's like you have kept your computer somewhere and you are sitting somewhere else. Is it like that? You are not saying anything. You are not commenting. You are not saying any not asking any doubts and questions. You didn't like the class? You should sometimes talk also. Sometimes speak. Now, how can a class become interactive?
Sir, show through the slides. It
it will be interested to us. It is totally
Okay.
blank.
No, I from the next class onward, there was some disturbance at the flat in the room.
Yes, sir.
I will do
Go
that.
on.
At
It
least
is not related to either textbook or to find
but,
out the what is the topic. It is taking the time, and it is not.
So today in today's class and in the previous class session also, we have been talking about
Yes,
17th
sir.
century.
Only in
17th
general
century.
way the class is going on. It is
Okay.
not related to subject or not related to not completely like that, sir. Topic wise, this is the topic. This is the not. If we go like that, it will be somewhat interested.
When did you join the class? When did you join the class today? Did you join at 10:30?
10:30, sir. 10:30. It has started 17th century and 18th century. It is clear, sir. But it is unit 6. This topic and this is author discovering of this author this way. It is.
No, in the next class onwards, I will share my screen.
అలా చెప్తే బాగుంటుంది సార్. అట్లా ఉంటే కొద్దిగా ఇంట్రెస్ట్ అని వస్తుంది. ముందే కొత్త సబ్జెక్ట్స్ దాంతో ఇలా ఉన్నందుకు కొద్దిగా బ్లాంక్ గా ఉంది సార్.
I understood. I got it. I will share my screen. I will share my camera on the next class onwards. Okay, you don't worry about
yes, sir.
that.
Yes, sir. Somewhat interested.
Yeah. That is how it becomes interesting. That's your point, right?
Sir, good morning, sir. Chakra speaking, sir.
Okay, fine.
Sir, Chakra speaking, sir.
Okay.
Can you speak loudly, sir?
Yes, I can. Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's related to the 17th century and 18th century. Can you explain once again, please? What is the topic? Let me know.
Yes, we have been talking about 17th century literature, starting with John Dryden, because John Dryden is the first author you are doing in this blog. And we talked about in brief about John Milton, John Donne. We talked about brief Alexander Pope. Of course, we talked about Alexander Pope, who belongs to neoclassical school of poetry. And then, of course, we talked about Dr. Samuel Johnson, who is not a great poet, but then he's a great thinker, where we talked about an essay called Lives of Great Poets.
Okay.
And later, in conclusion, we ended our class with the age of Johnson. We said that age of Johnson is the age of reason, is the age of sense and sensibility. And the age of Johnson is known for writing a poem, for his poem called The Vanity of Human Wishes. He is actually known for his critical essay called Lives of Great Poets, where he talks about different poets, starting with Chaucer, and it ends with Alexander Pope.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so that's what we have actually talked about. And then, of course, we talked about prose, age of Johnson.
Sir,
and age
can
of
you speak
prose.
loudly? Can you speak loudly?
Yeah, we talked about age of prose, where we talked about the contributions made by these people called Richardson and Steele. Joseph, Thomas Richardson and Steele. Okay. And then, of course, we talked about the other two novelists called Richardson and Henry Fielding. We talked about all their writings, Pamela, Moll Flanders. I have given you some details about, some information about it. So that's how the class ended. Okay, and that was summing up for the class.
Okay.
That's what we did in the class. Thank you. Okay, all right. Any more things? Any more questions? Okay, all right, guys. Is that okay for you? Anybody wants to make a comment or anything or pose a question?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, who is that? Next. Okay, then, guys, see you in the next class. Okay, take care. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining the session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you very
sir.
much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you much.
Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Most welcome. Welcome all. Okay. Bye. Take care.